Hello and welcome to On Second Street, where today we have assembled our monthly panel to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of Canadian politics. Kris Sims joins us from Alberta, where she's the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and Tristin Hopper is a columnist with the National Post. Thank you both for taking a few minutes to chat today. We've got several different issues to explore. One that I thought was interesting was some research that came out of your organization recently, Kris, where you compared provincial politicians' salaries in Canada with state politicians' salaries in the United States. You want to tell us a little bit about the report, some of the findings?
Yeah, and it's got some provincial politicians in a bit of a flutter. I've been getting some text messages about this saying, it's a different system. You can't compare it. Well, just watch us. So our Ontario director, Noah Jarvis, bright young kid, he did the deep dive work on this. And he compared, what do they call them? Subnational, which is a fancy term of saying provincial or state. So forget the feds,
Yeah.
provincial versus state.
Yeah.
How much are they paid? Generally speaking, provincial politicians in Canada are paid more than twice what their state representative counterparts would be paid in the United States. I'll give you a good apples to apples comparison. So here in the province of Alberta, MLAs are paid just under $130,000 per year. Okay. We have a population of around 5 million people in Alberta. Let's compare that to a nice big shiny state. I'm not going to, go with Missouri or Alabama or whatever. Compare it to Colorado. Colorado has got a population of around 6 million people. They pay their state legislators like $60,000 per year. Canadian. So you have to ask yourself the question, what kind of value are we getting in return for this money? And I think it boils down to this. Do we want politicians to have a permanent job as a politician? Or should they be retired cops, retired teachers, small business owners, right? In Montana, for example, they get together once every 2 years for a few weeks in January. I think they pay them with pepperoni and a parking pass.
Pepperoni and a parking
I'm not
pass.
really exaggerating.
Tristin, what do you think about that? Are we paying our politicians too much?
Early in my journalism career, my boss at the time, I was working at the Yukon News, and he said, well, you pay politicians to a certain amount. I mean, you need to pay a certain level to attract a certain level of talent to politics. So if you underpay them, you're going to get a bunch of schlubs, was the argument at the time. And I found that compelling. But politics is not like pig farming. Pig farming is very unpleasant. If you're not going to make money at it, there's no reason to do it. So you actually, if you don't make money pig farming, all the pig farms just go away. But politics, there's a whole bunch of reasons that people go into politics. And this came up actually in the sort of last months of the Trudeau era. And if you compared the competence of cabinet ministers in the last months of Justin Trudeau versus, say, peak Jean Chrétien era, the level of competence and, intelligence was just dramatically lower in all of these positions.
Mm-hmm.
The differences between them is in the Chrétien era, most of these cabinet ministers were taking a substantial to work in public service. So you look at all of these figures who were in the Chrétien cabinet, Paul Martin being the best example. I mean, he was the richest when he became prime minister. He was the wealthiest head of government in the world at the time with Canadian steamship lines. So he's taking a pay cut in a public service position. As a result, as soon as the politics isn't making sense, they're not delivering their agenda, whatever, they bow out of the position and let someone else take over. And what is characteristic of the final months of the Justin Trudeau era was you just had incompetent cabinet ministers who had no idea what they were doing, clinging on with both hands, refusing to criticize the leader, doing anything to stay in power. And it's because these people were living a life they would never, ever see again. This is the only time they had ever made that kind of money. This is the only time in their life they had ever had a private driver. This is the only time in their life they were getting invited to these types of galas. So the political job very much superseded any of the goals or other peripherals of governance. So this has changed my thinking. By paying a high level of money, you can also get a bunch of schlubs who are locked for life in a position that they're terrified to lose at all costs, and they become bad legislators as a result.
Listen, we got to take a commercial break, but when we come back, I want to keep exploring this issue. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back on 2nd Street talking about a whole bunch of different issues. Before the break, we were talking about politician pay. And Tristin, you were, I think, leaning towards saying that we're paying our politicians provincially too much because sometimes you're getting these, to use your term, schlubs, people that are just hanging around politics because it's the best job they'll ever have.
Yeah, well, just the argument that just the general argument, and I think that's what that's what drives all these high wages, whether it's at the local level. And I've seen this at the local level. Whenever you're defending, why is your mayor making this much money? Why is your premier making this much money? And in Canadian politicians, on the whole, are some of the most well-paid politicians in the world. As Ms. Sim was alluding to, you can have major states like Montana, not tremendously populated, but you still have part-time legislatures. Sitting in U.S. states. And even in the UK, the House of Lords is a volunteer position. I think you get as much snuff or brandy as you can drink. But they intentionally do not pay them because they say, well, this is the House of Lords. Yeah. You're supposed to have some other form of income. You're supposed to have completed your other term of service, or some wealthy blue blood. But the whole point of the thing is that we're not paying you. This isn't a job for you. This is sort of a volunteer position. So, you can see this at the local level. I'm sure some in your audience, if they've ever worked any volunteer position, we're all going to museums and public attractions this summer as part of our vacations, or at least I would hope so. You can immediately tell when you walk into a museum and it's a volunteer-run organization. People who are there because they want to be there. Versus sometimes the city council, we should have a museum for this. You hire a bunch of summer students, everybody's checked out, everybody's just reading a novel, nobody cares. So
right.
We fail to consider, we just think, more money equals higher competency. And again, that is true in some things like farming, carpentry, roofing, unpleasant jobs that no one would do if you weren't paying them properly. But politics is not like that. There's any number of reasons why people get into politics, and a certain threshold at which, if you're paying too much, you actually start attracting the wrong kinds of people you want in those positions.
It's a tricky issue to manage. One thing I do wonder about with this too is that our provinces tend to be a lot bigger than their states. And if you're going to have to trek all the way to the capital, though maybe with technology now we can avoid some of this, but if you have to trek all the way to the capital, you probably have to make it worthwhile for someone financially. Kris, I'm guessing people can find the report on your site, but I want to get your take on something else. Tristin's raised this question about Canadian politicians going abroad on their travel. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think politicians should be staying in Canada when it's their vacation time, or should they be free to go wherever they want?
Well, from the taxpayer's perspective, we're into it for what it costs for money, but then also accountability. So I would say if they're not spending taxpayers' money, we don't really care where they go. But when it comes to communications and how things look, like politically speaking, just to give some free comms advice, you don't look accountable if you've got some state of emergency going on and you're going overseas. But that's just, free comms advice. If they're not spending taxpayers' money, we don't get too worked up about it.
Free comms advice. Okay, Tristin, what's your take? This is something you've raised. What do you think?
Yeah, the context, as we're recording this, Mark Carney is taking his summer vacation to Italy. Well, it's his vacation. It's none of your business. But it is weird that Canadians do tolerate this, and you will have people defending him saying, it's just because he's in charge of this country and has to defend its agenda, in the international sphere. But the minute he has vacation, he flees this country at the, first opportunity to go to another country. That's irrelevant, to the first point. And I would argue, this is more common in Europe. If you live in a small micro European state and you want to go to the beach or you want to go to the mountains, you often have to cross international borders. But this is Canada. Anything you want for a summer vacation exists in spades in Canada. So, this is, since we're going to be referencing the U.S. and, differential Canadian-U.S. policy, this is not something that Americans would tolerate in their head of government. or their president. If you had a U.S. president that the minute they had vacation, they were traveling overseas to a foreign country, they would take it as a vote of non-confidence in the touristic sites of their own nation. And yet we've had 2 consecutive prime ministers who this was just treated normally. As soon as Justin Trudeau had vacation time, he would travel to a Caribbean in the middle of summer, which always struck me as strange. I mean, when you go to Detroit, there are no imported cars. Everybody's driving a Ford, a GM, even though those are inferior cars that I don't particularly like to drive. But, there is a social stigma for not using your own product.
With this issue, personally, I don't care. I get Chris's point politically about, traveling abroad. I don't care where they travel in their free time. The only time I care is when they're lecturing me that we're in a climate crisis, and then they're jetting off all over the world on their vacations, doing the exact opposite of what they want everyone else to do.
Yep.
When we come back, I want to explore some of the refugee health costs that have been in the news and the government's recent decision. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back on 2nd Street, talking about all kinds of different issues with our monthly panel. Guys, before the break, I mentioned we're going to chat about refugee healthcare. I mean, this is an interesting issue. Canada, of course, accepts lots of refugees and asylum seekers every year. Sometimes these people come from very dire situations. They arrive with the shirt on their back and so forth. So then there's the question of, well, what kind of health care do we provide for people that, they haven't been living here, haven't been paying into the system, but they've got no money and we've accepted them into the country. And earlier this year, the Prime Minister had a policy where these individuals were going to have to pay about 30% co-payments of the cost. So the government would pay most of the bill, but they would at least have to contribute a bit. And now the government has backed away on that promise. Something that's controversial in this is that some have pointed out, including the Toronto Sun, that sometimes the benefits that these people are receiving are more generous than what Canadian taxpayers are getting from the government, people who have lived in this country and paid taxes their whole lives. Kris, we'll come to you first on this one. What do you think the government should do? What's the fine line that needs to be walked there in terms of making sure people have health care that's necessary, obviously, but not going too far?
I think this is another one of those situations that's very similar to what the carbon tax was for a long time, of because we live in such a beautiful country, we have this weird sin tax sort of approach to it, of taking advantage of people's good nature and saying, oh, well, they're refugees. Of course we should give them good health care. But are they really? Where are they exactly coming from? Because are they coming, like you said, with the shirt on their backs from a war-torn situation? Yes, most people have compassion in that situation. But we all know that government is terrible, super inefficient, and that lots of people are refugees that come to Canada that aren't in those situations. And to your point, there are people here in Canada who are multi-generation Canadian, been paying into the tax system all this time, and they don't have glasses and dentistry covered. They don't have hearing covered. They don't have those kind of gold-plated medical things covered. Mm-hmm. But the moment somebody arrives here, they all of a sudden get it. And I will point out, I know you didn't mean to, when you said the government pays for it, no. Taxpayers pay for it.
Taxpayers.
Taxpayers pay for it. So I think ultimately a very good litmus test is what Premier Danielle Smith is doing. This coming October, it isn't just a vote on separation. It's a should we get people who aren't citizens, who haven't been paying into the tax system all this time, should we charge them user fees? When they're going into the emergency rooms, when they're filling up classrooms, when they've just arrived, should we charge them user fees? That's a very good question. I'm glad they're asking it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the results of that question. And you made a good point too, and that is that these are not all people arriving with the shirts on their backs from war-torn nations. I mean, it sounds like there's some people scamming the system here too, where they're here on a student visa and then they don't want to leave, so they claim that they're, seeking asylum or whatever. It certainly doesn't seem to add up. Tristin, what's your take on this issue?
Oh, yeah, this is in a immigration system that is more broken now than at any other point in Canadian history. This is the most conspicuously broken level of the immigration system. So as we're speaking, I think the numbers are we have 500,000 asylum claimants at the moment. So that's 500,000 people who, and the rules, nobody believes me when I tell them this, You just enter the country, even if it's illegally. I mean, you cross the border illegally. You go up to any public official and you say, I'm applying for asylum. Even if that's like obviously not true. I mean, if you speak to anyone within the system, they'll say, they'll be approached by a guy with his wife and kids in tow. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to be persecuted for my homosexuality in whatever my home country is. Like, just obviously fake asylum claims. But the thing is, the waiting list is more than 2 years. So no matter how dumb and made up your asylum claim is, you get status as an asylum claimant for at least 2 years in Canada. And then even of those, and then due to cuts in the system and sort of, various misguided streamlining, now we are actually approving the asylum status of people sometimes without even an in-person interview. If you're on a certain number of countries, sometimes it'll be based just on the documentation that could just be filled with fraud and made up claims, and that is never investigated. So you have someone here. So yes, a lot of these claims are not correct, and on a very easy fix to make people pay for services not available to Canadians, the government couldn't even do that.
No. It feels like too often in this country, we taxpayers are just getting walked all over by incompetent government systems that are getting abused by people. And I suspect there's some of that going on here. When we come back, I want to get your thoughts on some of the wildfires that we're seeing across the country. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back on 2nd Street. Now we're going to shift gears to talk about wildfires. Obviously, this is a fairly significant issue. Certainly, people in Ontario have been affected quite a bit this year by wildfires, the smoke coming in from northern Ontario. BC, again, having wildfires. I mean, you find this in many different parts of the country. It's nothing new, but we've attracted the ire of the president south of the border, who's saying we're not doing a very good job managing our vast forests in this country. Tristin, does he have a leg to stand on this particular criticism? Are we not doing a good job? Is that the problem?
On his particular complaint, no. I do like that U.S. President Donald Trump and a lot of environmental activists are kind of on the same page of this. They'll see massive wildfires in Canada as sort of a preventable thing due to some sort of government inaction. I mean, just look at a map of Canada. It's mostly forest with nothing in it. For thousands of years, it has caught fire. I mean, you can look at early colonial accounts, Indigenous oral history accounts that, this is the time of year when you can't breathe because the air is filled with smoke. So we've always been catching fire. That's what we do. But at the same time, the fact that it is causing, more trouble for certain communities, that you are having mismanaged evacuations. There are things, of course, that the government can do to deal with wildfires. But the idea that if Canada just worked a little harder, our giant freaking Western European-sized forest that gets tinder dry each year and has thunderstorms over it all the time, that none of that would happen, that's just fantasy. I mean, some of it is going to burn. If it's in the middle of nowhere, we should let it burn. And those were the specific fires that Trump was calling out. So, when he can't breathe playing golf, that's the kind of fire that you should be letting burn. Just a boreal forest fire in the middle of nowhere. The forest is meant to burn. If you just leave it, it's just going to stack up fuel. So, so that's my nuance.
Let me get, Kris, I want to get your take, but first I want to share these numbers because these were surprising to me. I looked on the federal government's website about sort of the area of fire that forest fires have consumed each year. Currently, as of August, we're at about 4 million hectares. Last year was 8.5 million, so it was double. And, obviously the year isn't done yet. 2023, 18 million. So we're nowhere near the high in the last, 5-10 years now. But it certainly feels like there's a lot more attention to forest fires this year. I'll ask you the same question I put to Tristin, and that is, are we doing a good enough job trying to prevent and make sure that forest fires either don't happen or that they don't become as big as they can be?
So I'm not a forest fire expert, but I did grow up in the Fraser Canyon in British Columbia. And I will say generally, government is terrible at doing things. And it is especially terrible now. I've been in this game for almost 30 years. Every time I lift a lid on any ministry in any department, It is ridiculous. It's like that scene from Community where Troy comes back up with all the pizzas and everything's on fire. It's awful. Awful. So I don't think anybody really cares, frankly, about the boreal forest fires that are naturally part of the cycle. They sure do care, though, when Lytton burns down. They sure do care when Boston Bar is being threatened, or when people are fleeing. There's 12,000 people fleeing Summerland, BC right now. I will point out that in British Columbia, they are spending $1.4 billion this year on forestry, $266 million on parks management, $428 million on emergency climate action. And these deputy ministers, forget the politicians for a second, these bureaucrats are paid $360,000 per year. I will point out that one Mars water bomber costs around $5 million, and it costs about $10,000 an hour to operate them. Do the math, folks. I think that from a taxpayer's perspective, they should definitely demand better service in BC.
Yeah, it sounds like we got too many white shirts maybe.
The
in
Mars
that
is
province, and not
decommissioned,
enough
though. She
people
probably
with hard
meant
hats, so-
Canadair.
Yes, but just as an example.
There
Sure.
we go.
You can still buy one, though.
All right, listen, we got to run. As always, thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching.